بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العظيم اللهم علمنا بما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وتعليما إنك على كل شيء قدير. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Okay, so last week we looked at prophets in terms of what are some of the things that we believe about the prophets and how do we confirm that a prophet is truly a prophet. And so we said that this week we're going to look at the aspect of the revealed books and also the aspect of the angels, time permitting. And so the thing that we have to know is that why have we been going on this journey, as we've been going on? Because, in particular, everyone that's here is already Muslim. So the default is that everyone already believes in these things. However, the concept of it is that, if we're talking to someone, we can't necessarily just say that, Allah says that in the Quran, or, the Prophet ﷺ said this, and so on and so forth. If a person doesn't believe in the first place, then how can we, convey the message to them in a way that they can understand and perceive it? However, from the standpoint of belief, we understand and we hold firm that the Quran, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the uncreated speech of Allah. And so that remains true in all of its manifestations. And so when we talk about the books of Allah, we say that we know of 4 in particular by name that are mentioned in the Quran. We know of one that it was indicated to us about his book. However, it's not necessarily, it's just referred to as the scrolls, the suhuf. So, first and foremost, we have the Zabur that was given to David. And essentially the Zabur in English is usually referred to as the Psalms. And this was the book that was given to David. Or in Arabic we say Dawood. Now remember we said before that we distinguish between prophets and messengers. So everyone that we're mentioning here is going to be which of the two, a prophet or a messenger? Quick pop quiz.
I'm going to say a prophet. A messenger. That's what my mind meant, messenger. I'm sorry.
I was about to say, I was like, technically speaking, I can't say that you're wrong, because every messenger is a prophet, but right. Not every prophet is a messenger. But these are going to be specifically prophets. Then we have the Torah of Moses, of Musa. Then we have the Injil of Jesus, Isa alayhi salam, or in English, of course, it will be referred to as the Bible. And then ultimately we have the Quran of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Alayhim as-salatu was-salam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's peace and blessings be upon all of them. Now, as I mentioned before, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He also mentions about the suhuf. So, for example, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says, at the end of one of the surahs in the Quran, Suhufi Ibrahim wa Musa. The scrolls or the suhuf of Abraham and Moses. And so, we know that Ibrahim is also one of the messengers as well. Now, the aspect of the book of God is that, just as we talked about last week, we said that all prophets are truthful and trustworthy. So that also includes the message that they send. The message that they send is also going to be trustworthy. So we have these four that we know specifically by name. Then we have the suhuf, for the scrolls of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And we say that in their original form, when they were sent, they were all true. Every last one of them were true. And they had some interaction with the angel Jibril alayhi salam. Because one of the primary functions of the angel Jibril is that he sends down revelation. Now, the way that we look at the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the books of God at this point in time, is that, for example, some people ask the question, well, if the Bible was revealed by God, the Torah was revealed by God, and so on and so forth, then, why don't we continue to read, those books? Now, in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, this situation came up. What happened was that Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, coming from the Quran itself, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions about, there being good in the Torah, being good in the Bible. So Umar radiyallahu anhu, he decided that, I'll pick up the Torah and I'll read it and see what it says. What are the benefits that I can gain from reading it? Because again, we established that these are the books of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because one of the things that we believe is that, for example, when we say that in terms of the 6 articles of faith, like if anyone hasn't noticed, is that essentially what we've been doing is that we've been going over the 6 articles of faith, just a little bit in more detail. And so if you look at it, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He's commanded us to, آمن الرسول بما أنزل إليه من ربه ومؤمنون كل آمن بالله وملائكته وكتبه ورسوله. Is that, Allah says this in the Quran itself. Is that, and I'm just going to translate the middle portion of the verse, but essentially Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says that, the believers and the messenger, they believe in what has been sent down from Allah, and part of that is that His kutub, His books, that is a necessary belief. However, the aspect of our belief in these books is that, again, we believe in them in their original form. So going back to the story of Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu is mentioned that he decided that he was going to pick up the Torah and read it and see, what does it have. What happened was that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he saw Umar reading the Torah, and it says that the Prophet ﷺ, in one narration, more or less, you could say that the Prophet ﷺ became upset. But essentially, what the Prophet ﷺ had said to Umar was that, "Ya Umar, if Musa was alive today, he would have no choice but to follow me." Meaning that he was essentially telling Umar that the Quran itself is sufficient for Umar. Now, how do we explain this as well? So the thing is that we acknowledge all of these books are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All of them. We acknowledge that they were truthful in their original form. However, what we say about them is that now in their present form, excluding the Quran itself, they have not been transmitted verbatim. Meaning that some things have been added, some things have been subtracted, some things have been changed. So the basis of it is that, and this is one of, I'm not going to get into it into type of detail, but this is one of the big debates that has been held within the realm of Islamic theology. Is that, for example, the way that we've been looking at theology so far, or Aqidah, is from the standpoint of first coming from the rational perspective, meaning that, a person that doesn't believe in God at all, to the point where we can say that we believe in God and so on and so forth. Whereas some of the early scholars, they actually looked at it from the standpoint of, just go to the Quran. That's all you need. And that is definitely the basis. Because we acknowledge that the Quran is the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that it's absolute truth. In the sense that, if there's something in the Quran, we affirm it, whether or not it, suits our, personalities, whether or not it fits our, belief about things that we've had, and so on and so forth. We acknowledge that this is the words of Allah. So when it comes to all of these, and the reason why I'm saying these 3 is because these are the 3 that we still have some aspect of. When it comes to these 3 are conditioned by this one. So what do I mean? is that later on, the Prophet ﷺ initially, he, more or less you could say that he forbade Omar from reading the Torah. But eventually it was made to be, permissible to, engage with the other books, the other traditions, Christianity, Judaism, in terms of their books. So the Psalms, the Bible, the Torah, so on and so forth. However, the way that we look at these books in terms of Islam is that we have a criterion. So we look at it from the standpoint, again, this is our primary source. So if I pick up the Bible and I read something in it, if the Quran confirms it, I say that's true. If the Quran confirms something that's in the Bible or the Torah or the Zabur, true. 100%. Why? Because I'm not basing it upon these books in themselves as we have them now. I'm basing them upon the Quran. So even if I were to pick up, a regular book, like, Joe Schmo, philosopher, writes a book, and he mentions something in that book that, the Quran affirms, then I would say, that's true. It has nothing to do with Joe Schmo's philosopher. It just happens to be that Joe Schmo philosopher spoke something that is true, and I have this confirmation from the Quran itself. Now, the other aspect of it is that if I pick up the Bible, the Torah, the Zabur, and I look at it, and it mentions something that the Quran rejects, automatically I know batil. That's whatever is mentioned in that the Quran rejects, 100% is false. I cannot accept that. So what is the likeness of this? So for example, in the Bible, and there's even debate about if this is really verbatim or if this is really was in the Bible, so to speak. But the aspect of the crucifixion of Jesus, the Quran, it does not affirm the crucifixion of Jesus. So we say that any verses in the Bible that allude or you can say say that Jesus was crucified is absolutely false. And again, it's based upon this aspect of the Quran itself. Now, what happens if we go to the next level, which is that I read something in the Bible, the Torah, the Zabur, the Quran either affirms it, but it also doesn't reject it. Like, for example, in the Bible, if I'm not mistaken, it mentions that Jesus turned water into wine. Do we believe that? Do you believe that Jesus turned water into wine? Do you believe that Jesus turned water into wine? Do you believe that Jesus?
Not if I haven't read.
No?
Did it?
So now becomes the question. Did Jesus turn water into wine? When it comes to something that we find in the Bible or the Torah and the Injil, the Bible, the Torah or the Zabur, and we don't have anything in the Quran or the statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, it's neither to confirm it nor to reject it, then what happens is that it merely becomes permissible for me to believe it. Meaning that the Quran has not confirmed that it's 100% true, so I don't have to believe it. So there's nothing forcing me to believe it. There's nothing that requires me to believe it. But at the same time, I have nothing from the Quran or the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to say that it's untrue. This is why, for example, has anyone ever heard of the book Stories of the Prophets? In Arabic, they refer to as Qisas al-Anbiya or Qasas al-Anbiya, depending on which, But if you actually were to understand, is that many of the stories that we have of some of the prophets, particularly like, Moses and Jesus and things like that, many of those stories did not come from the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, nor did they come from the Quran itself. Where do we get them from? We got them from Muslims who were Christian or Jewish who converted to Islam, and they conveyed those stories that they learned while they were Christian or Jewish. And the thing is that those stories have been documented because they did not contradict anything that we had in terms of Islam. So because they didn't contradict anything in the Quran and they didn't contradict anything from the Sunnah, the historians have documented them and they just kept them. And so some of those stories, we don't have confirmation if they're actually 100% true or not. However, they've been documented, and if we want to believe them, fine. And particularly those things that are more or less just from that genre, they're just stories. Like, for example, things that, encourage someone to do good, these type of things. These are things that, are considered to be acceptable because, again, it doesn't go against the basic framework of Islam, and we have nothing from the standpoint of the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ to negate their truthfulness. All we're going to say is that it's going to fall into that realm that we talked about before, this aspect of dhanni, is that it's speculative, meaning I don't have 100% certainty that this is the case. However, if I choose to believe it, then it's fine. For example, with the story of Jesus turning water into wine, why can I believe it? Well, for one, we talked about the aspects of prophets and messengers, is that Allah will send them miracles. Two, is that in the time of Jesus alayhi salam, alcohol was not prohibited. Even in the time of the Muslims, alcohol initially was not prohibited. For example, you have a hadith, you have a narration in the Sahih of Imam Bukhari, where Ali ibn Abi Talib radhiyallahu anhu, he narrates about a situation when him and some of the other Sahaba got drunk at a celebration. They had, decided to celebrate. They had gotten intoxicated, and that's when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed the verse of Quran stating, "Do not come to the salat while you're in a state of intoxication." Because before alcohol became absolutely prohibited, it was a thing where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, "Do not come to the salat while you're in a state of intoxication." Because Ali was mentioning that we came to the salat and we were so kind of inebriated that we could kind of say from the partying that we did the night before, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed that do not come to the prayer while you're in a state of intoxication. But then eventually Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala outlawed alcohol altogether. So in the time of Isa alayhi salam, the time of Jesus, alcohol was not prohibited. So it leaves the door open for us to believe in it, or it leaves the door open for us to say, well, I don't believe it. I'm not going to. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that, for many of us, we don't necessarily think about it. And again, it's not an aspect of, something that we have to necessarily believe. However, from the standpoint of confirmation and rejection, this is something that we have to understand. It's that if we are going to pick up the Bible for whatever reason, we have to understand this criterion. It's that we have to cross-reference it to the Quran. But why do we have to do that? Part of the reason, as we've talked about previously, is the aspect that people, when they received their books, when the people received the Injil, when they received the Torah, when they received the Zabur, what happened is that some of these things were not fully documented in the time that they were being revealed. And then afterwards, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, is that people started to take their religious leaders as, lords outside of God, in the sense that they would manipulate the aspect of, the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to fit, whatever the case was. And they didn't have, limitations in terms of, what would be done. This is why, for example, like when we talked about the aspect of certain aspects of Christian history, and this is not something that is unknown. You have different Christian groups that will also acknowledge this. Is that, the holidays of Christmas and Easter, these are holidays that were never in Orthodox Christianity. Why is that? Because they actually were not Christian oriented at all. The origins of Christmas, for example, it goes back to pagan aspects, and it had to do with the winter solstice. And so what happened was that when Christianity started to take over different lands and they started to interact with pagan people, they basically make somewhat of a compromise, so to speak. So essentially what happened was that they allowed some of their pagan rituals and cultural norms to come into the Christian doctrine, and they just adopted it and made it Christian-like, so to speak. So for example, the aspect of, Christmas being December 25th, that was because it correlated directly with the winter solstice. You look in the Bible, you look in the Quran, and any other aspects of the birth of Jesus, nowhere does it ever affirm of Jesus being born in the winter time, let alone with snow and these type of things. Not only that, but for example, the aspect of Saint Nick, who eventually is referred to as Santa Claus. Again, this had more pagan and these type of origins. Saint Nick, if I'm remembering correctly, is more or less just considered to be like a saintly individual. Just a very kind and nice individual, and they turned it into an aspect of doctrine where he's the guy that goes around in one night giving toys to kids and so on and so forth. Saint Nicholas, yeah, Saint Nicholas. But that's the whole aspect. He was considered to be a saint, and his name was Nicholas. So it went from Saint Nicholas to Saint Nick to Santa Claus. But you see the progression here. The other aspect that plays a major role in this is that because of this aspect of, in particular, when we're talking about the aspect of these books, is that you have to go back in time to understand that for the average person, this was not a time of high literacy. For example, right now I'm reading a book on Muslim Spain, and in the beginning of it, one of the things that they mention is that, for example, there's one individual, I forget his name off the top of my head, but he was considered to be a person that basically knew all the knowledge that a person could know in his time. And he wrote, basically an encyclopedia during his time. But the thing is that if you, read some of the things that he was writing about, you'd be like, who would actually believe this stuff? However, this was because of the time that he was living in. And so he was considered to be the most intellectual person in his time, in his area. However, why I mention that is because the aspect of literacy was not, a common thing. Not everyone knew how to read. The vast majority of people did not know how to read. So what does this mean? This means that only the elites of society had access to any of these writings. Not only that, but this is way before the printing press. Way before. So what does that mean? It means that people were writing it themselves. Anyone that's written anything, probably people are glad the typewriter, went out of style. Why? Because anyone that's ever used a typewriter before knows that if you make a mistake, it's just you might as well just throw the paper out and start all over again. So the basis of it is that if you're writing something by hand, it's very easy to make a mistake. It's very easy to make a slip. And so, while these things are being passed, you have this issue. Then you bring into the aspect of it, the aspect of politics. Politics plays a very big issue. Why? Because in the political aspect, you're trying to navigate, different things, different policies. And oftentimes, people who are in leadership positions are not necessarily the most religiously cautious individuals. And this is one of the things that, has pervaded in society, is that certain things that have been attributed to, and the thing is that this is not even something that's limited to Christianity or Judaism, because if you look in Islamic history, this has been something that has been a situation as well. It never came to the aspect of the Quran, and this is where I'm trying to get to. The Quran has never been used in terms of manipulating what is actually said in the Quran for political aspects. However, statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ have been. Because after the Quran, what is the main source that the Muslims go to figure out what the religion is? Essentially, it's going to be the statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Like everyone wants to, is that in Bukhari, is that in Muslim, so on and so forth. So the statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ are the next. However, the statements of the Prophet ﷺ, we don't have an absolute certainty of what he said for the most part. Why do I say that? Is because most of the statements that we have from the Prophet ﷺ is again coming from the standpoint of what we call dhanni, meaning speculative, meaning that we have some type of certainty that he said it, but we don't have 100% certainty. This is where you get to the aspect of having a hadith that's da'if, a weak narration of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Or even worse, you have a statement of the Prophet ﷺ that's mawdu', which is a fabricated one. So in Islam, we have had this aspect of people, and a lot of times these things came up because of political situations. Political situations give rise to people trying to use whatever methods they can use to get people to back up their political position. So you had this, aspect creep in. But then you have the other aspect. Question for you. What language did Jesus speak?
Was it Hebrew? That's what I would say. You said. Yeah.
Hebrew?
I was going to say Hebrew. Arabic? English? So I don't know.
You're partly right.
English?
No, definitely no. I'm saying her final statement is that I don't know.
Right.
The actual answer to the question is no one actually knows. Because actually the common answer that's given in terms of people who study the history of Jesus is that they say that he spoke Aramaic. That's the common answer that's given. However, even that claim of him speaking Aramaic is not necessarily supported.
So what is Aramaic a combination of?
Honestly, I haven't looked into it, so I don't want to give you an answer of something I don't know. But Aramaic is one of the ancient languages, and that's one of the ones that people who study the history of like Jesus and Christianity, that's one of the ones that's more popular in terms of saying that he spoke Aramaic. However, there are some that will also say that he didn't even speak Aramaic, that that's not the language of Jesus either. So the end of the day, what happens is that we don't know for certain what language Jesus spoke. Now, why is that significant?
For translation reasons.
Exactly. Most of the Bibles that we have, that we have access to in America anyway, are going to be in what language? English, right? Then you have some that are written in Spanish, some that are written in German, some are written in French, and so on and so on and so forth. But I do not think that they have any Bible that is actually written in Aramaic. Now, why is this an issue? This is an issue, and this is going to get to something that we're going to talk about in terms of the Quran. This is an issue because anyone that's ever studied language and knows anything about the nuances of language, you'll understand that language is something very specific and very particular. Meaning that there are certain things that you're not going to be able to get across in another language. Like I remember before I started to try to learn Arabic in a more, detailed way. Because before I learned Arabic, the only other language that I even attempted to have some understanding of was Spanish. But, I don't usually mention Spanish because I didn't really give it its due right. I took 6 years of Spanish, could barely speak a lick of it. But, I wasn't like really trying to put an effort into learning Spanish. I probably did it because my father forced me.
Within their culture, different words mean different things.
Yep.
Depending on what part.
Yep. So I remember before I learned Arabic, I remember I used to watch videos of like, some, sheikh, some scholar, speaking in Arabic and so on and so forth. And then the translator's just like, I don't know how to translate this. Or like, I can't think of the word to translate. I'm just like, well, how do you understand it if you can't translate it? Like, but I didn't understand that concept until I actually went to learn Arabic. And then I started to come to the point, it's just like, how would I translate that in English? Because there are certain things when you're learning a language, it's not just about learning like words. It's also learning like, what are the, underlying meanings of those words. And I'll give you an example. No one in here speaks a second language, do they? Anyone? Okay. I'll give you an example. When I was overseas in Yemen, there was a concept that came up where, it was kind of like, thinking of the different ways that you would translate certain phrases in English into Arabic. And so one of the things that, my classmates came up with, don't ask me why, but I'm just giving you the example. They said, how would you translate "what's up, dog"? So, from the standpoints of, Arabic, the closest thing you can get to it is like saying like, ماذا فوق كلب, in terms of like a literal translation.
What was it?
ماذا فوق كلب. But the thing is that if I were to say that to an Arab, they would have no clue what I was talking about. And actually, they would probably take me more literally, and they would actually be looking for, what dog are you talking about? And what are you talking about? What's above it? However, if I were to try to give them the contextual aspect of it, because when I say, what's up, dog, what does that actually mean? What does that actually represent? It's more or less a greeting that people are using. Now, the thing is that, from the standpoint of Islam, from the standpoint of Arabic culture, to call someone a dog is in no way, shape, or form a sign of endearment or a sign of acceptable, speech to someone.
So calling like cultural nuances.
Yeah,
too, right?
exactly. So the thing is that within language itself, there are certain things that are just culturally known that is going to come out in the language. And if you don't understand that cultural norm, you're not going to be able to understand fully what's going on. That's why people who go into deep understanding of language, one of the things that you have to study is the culture. Like, for example, if you want to go into deep study of Arabic and deep study of like usul al-fiqh, one of the things that you have to do is that you have to master Arabic poetry. Why do you have to master Arabic poetry? Why? Because this was the poetry in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. So this is going to give you indication of how words are used during his time. Because not everything that, has a meaning to us is necessarily the true meaning. And this is the whole aspect of, for example, like classical Arabic. Is that, I speak classical Arabic. But when I speak to an Arab from, our modern times today, sometimes they don't understand what I'm talking about. The way that I put it to people, it's like me speaking Shakespearean English to people. It's that, it's English, but do we really understand it? I'll give you a test. This is something that I remember, one of the few things I remember from my English class in high school. How many people heard of Romeo and Juliet? Most people, right? So how many people remember the balcony scene? Juliet goes out on the balcony and she says what? Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Now what does that mean?
Where are you?
Where are you?
You coming?
Where are you? Where are you? Are you coming? Where are you? You coming? You all failed. I said it was a test. You all came up with the same answer and you all failed. That's not what it meant. That's not what Shakespeare meant when he said, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? You have to remember that Shakespeare, he's writing poetry. Like all his plays and things like that, they're written in poetic form.
Right.
So when he says, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo, on the mouth of Juliet, is that the whole basis of the concept of Romeo and Juliet is that Romeo and Juliet are two individuals that want to get married, but they know they can't because their families are feuding. And so essentially both families are kind of saying like, over our dead bodies type of thing. So, and Juliet has no clue that, Romeo is anywhere near. So when she goes out on the balcony, she's more or less just speaking to herself out loud. So when she says, Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo, what that actually meant in the poetic form in Shakespeare's time is like, Romeo, Romeo, why are you Romeo? Meaning, why are you from the family that you're from that we can't be together? Yes. Exactly. We wouldn't come to that conclusion. Why? Because most of us haven't studied classical English in that way.
I barely know English
Yeah.
today.
So the thing is that, we barely know classical English. Some of us, the fakir here, barely knows English. Like I could probably tell you more about Arabic grammar than I can tell you about English grammar. But this is the thing, is that language has a big role to play into how we, understand things. This is why we say, in their original form, we agree, all of them are correct. All of them have the same message. All of them are from God. However, over time, because of these different, aspects that we've mentioned and so on and so forth, they've all been manipulated, corrupted, distorted, so on and so forth. Now, this goes to the aspect of the Quran. What makes the Quran so special? The aspect of the Quran is that, anyone remember what the first revelation was? What was the first revelation to be sent down? Iqra.
Read.
Great. That's the most common answer that's given. That's when it says Iqra, that it means read. However, if you were to go to the Arabic language, Iqra, it does have the indication of read, but Iqra also has the indication of recite. And this is why the Quran is considered to be a recital as well. It's that you recite the Quran. That you have to recite the Quran. So for example, in the Salah, we don't read the Quran, we do what? We recite the Quran. So part of this basis in terms of our understanding of the Quran is that the Quran was a book that was to be recited. This is why the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ himself, he was considered to be what? Ummi, unlettered. He was not a person, the dominant position as he was not a person that read or written. He read or wrote. Told you I was not great at English. But he was not a person that read or wrote. So, what is the basis? Is that the people at the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, these were people who were orally oriented. Meaning what? Is that they memorized things very quickly and they memorized things with exact detail. It's just like, for example, when someone has a sense that is weakened or possibly, null and void altogether. For example, if a person becomes blind, generally speaking, what happens? Their sense of hearing becomes more acute. Why? Because basically they're overcompensating for a sense that they no longer have. Or the opposite, like a person who may be deaf, their sense of sight becomes more acute. This is why some people who are deaf, they are very good at reading people's lips. Like, if I were to try to read someone's lips, it'd just be like, I wouldn't begin to be able to tell you what they said. However, there are some people, they can read someone's lips and tell you exactly what they said. And so from the standpoint of the Prophet ﷺ coming to a community a large portion was ummi, they were unlettered people, so that oral traditions became more prevalent. And also the aspect of poetry was something very big in their society, and also being very precise in your poetry. These were people who were masters of language. So what happens? This is why the Quran, even to this day, is the most memorized book in the world. So what does that do? It preserves the book in its original form. And this is why, from a standpoint of, for example, fiqh, Islamic law, any Quran that is not in Arabic is not a Quran. Why? Because the Quran can only be in Arabic. This is why, for example, if you look at translations of the Quran, you'll have some books that will come to a particular word in the Quran and they either A, won't translate it, or B, they'll give an explanation of it, or C, it'll be a combination of the two. Why is that? Because there are certain words in the Quran that we cannot translate. There's no real English equivalent. And you have to explain, what is going on here. And this is the aspect of language, is that language doesn't just have an aspect of just a basic meaning. There's also a cultural context that goes with it. What did this meaning have in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and so on and so forth. This is why, for example, the scholars would disagree about certain things. For example, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِذَا لَسْتَمُ النِّسَاء, that if you touch women, talking about the making of wudu. This is something that's mentioned in the Quran. If you touch women, then it breaks your wudu. Essentially you have to go make wudu again. But the question is, what does that actually mean? Does it mean any touch? Does it mean, and this is, an aspect of language. So for example, if you look at some of the early scholars of Islam who, spent their time learning the Arabic language, in great detail and, looking at the different statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and so on and so forth, they came to different opinions. So for example, Imam Shafi'i, he looked at this verse and he took it from a very literal perspective. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, if you touch women, it breaks your wudu. Okay, that's it. So from the standpoint of Imam Shafi'i, if you have skin-to-skin contact with a woman who you are able to marry, then that breaks your wudu. Imam Malik, he looked at it and he said, well, this is not necessarily a literal type of thing of just touching, but this is more or less, it's obvious what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala means here from the aspect of the language is that this is a lustful touching. This is if you touch someone with lust. So if I lustfully touch someone of the opposite sex, then yes, that would break my wudu. But if not, it doesn't. So if I just I'm at the grocery store and I accidentally touch the cashier's hand, then that doesn't break my wudu because I didn't take lust out of it. I was just getting my money back. Imam Abu Hanifa, he looked at it differently. Imam Abu Hanifa said that this was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's way of mentioning intercourse without actually saying it. That this was a way of, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, keeping us in the framework of modesty and not necessarily saying intercourse directly, but saying touch as a, alluding to the aspect of intercourse. So from Imam Abu Hanifa's perspective, it's only intercourse itself that will cause it. So even if you touch a person of the opposite sex lustfully, skin to skin, it will not break your wudu. But all this is going back to what is actually said, but what is the context of when this was revealed, so that we can get an understanding. So, going back to the aspect of the Quran, we say about the Quran is that Islam is the only deen, at least of those of the quote-unquote Abrahamic branches, meaning that those that trace their lineage back to Ibrahim alayhi salam, it's the only one that we have our book in its original language and we have it conferred to us bimutawatir. We talked about this term before, mutawatir, meaning that there have been so many people who have confirmed the Quran in the way that we have it to this day that it's unfathomable that all these people made it up. Because the Quran is the basis for the Muslim. So how do we know that the Quran is the original Quran that was revealed in the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? It's this aspect of mutawatir. There have been so many people that confirmed this, that have, double checked it and rechecked it and so on and so forth. This is why, for example, if someone comes up and starts reciting, goes and, starts leading the salat, if you have someone who's a hafiz standing behind them, they'll be able to correct them, even to the minute letter, even to the aspect of the difference between vowel sounds, whether it's going to be an a or u or e sound. And the whole basis of this is that we're preserving, and actually we're not the ones preserving it. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the hafidhun. He's the one that's preserving the Quran. But He's doing it through what? Through us, by memorization, and also, now that we have it, it's written down. And this is part of the history of the Quran, is that during the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the Khalifa right after the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq anhu, they had many different ghazws. A ghazw is a battle. And so ghazawats is the plural of that, battles. And so they had many different battles that were taking place, and what happened was that some of the memorizers of the Quran were being killed in these battles. So Umar ibn Khattab radiyallahu anhu, he went to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiyallahu anhu, and he said to Abu Bakr, we need to compile the Quran into one mushaf, into one book. And Abu Bakr has said initially to Umar, do you want me to do something that the Prophet ﷺ did not do? Because in the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, the Quran was not placed into one mushaf. So it was written down, but it was not in one bound book. People would have it on different pieces of parchment, different pieces of bone and leather and whatever they can use. This is before the discovery of paper. So they would write it down on whatever they had. And so Abu Bakr is saying, do you want me to do something that the Prophet ﷺ did not do? And Umar has said, هذا خير, this is something good. Because the basis is that if we don't do this, and the people who have memorized the Quran continue to die, the Quran is going to be lost. So eventually Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he agreed to this. Then during the time of Uthman, this is after the spread of Islam. What happened was that because Islam has spread so massively, and particularly during the time of Umar Khattab, is that the Muslims were now starting to interact with the people from all over the place. In particular, people who were speaking different language outside of Arabic. And initially, we haven't started going over Arabic or anything like that, but has anyone studied Arabic in here? Not yet? Okay. So in Arabic, you have certain letters that have what they call nuqtas, or dots. And they have those dots in order to distinguish between them. You at least did the letters. So for example, if I have this, that's called a ta. If I have this, that's called a tha. If I have this, that's a noon. And I have this, that's a ba. Now, the thing is that during the time of the early generation of the Sahaba, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and the early generation of Muslims after them, none of these existed. There were no dots. So how did you know the difference between a ba, a tha, a ta, a noon, and so on and so forth? Context. Just like, for example, when you read something in English, you ever seen one of those little things where it's like, if you can read this, and they jumble up all the words and stuff like that? The basis of it is that when people are fluent in language and they read, you're not actually reading every letter. You just know the basic form. So that whole, if you can read this type of thing, it's the basic aspect of it is that if you keep the first letter and the last letter the same, you can jumble up everything that's in between, and a person will, generally speaking, know what that word is. Now the thing is that the problem though is that because Islam was spreading so vastly and people were not Arabs, the aspect of certain things being misquoted and things like that from the Quran started to happen. So in the time of Uthman ibn Affan, what he did was that he standardized how the Quran was going to be. And so this is why today every Quran that you have, if you look in if you have an Arabic Quran, if you look in it, it will always give you that the Sanad, the chain of transmission, goes back to Uthman bin Affan. Every Quran. It won't be considered to be a true, Quran if it does not have that, lineage going back to Uthman bin Affan. Because once Uthman bin Affan had set up the standard Quran that, the Quran was going to be based upon, he had every other Quran destroyed. Whether that be burnt, whether that be buried, whether that be placed in water, whatever the case may be, every other Quran was destroyed, and then they sent out copies of this master Quran. But the whole aspect of it is to preserve the letter of the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because this is the final revelation. And because Islam is the final religion, we've seen what happened with the others. So that's why I said before, is that it's not to say that Islam has not had the aspect of political fallacy in terms of using the religion to promote a particular political position. However, in the terms of adding or subtracting from the Quran, no one can do that. Why? Because you have too many people that have memorized it. It's just like, for example, hypothetically, if the Fatiha was the only surah in the Quran, you couldn't come to the Salat, or somewhere else, talking about some, Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah, Rabbil Alameen, Iyaka na'budu wa iyaka nasta'een, Qul huwallahu ahad, you couldn't, even though I'm all these I'm pulling from the Quran itself, but you couldn't mix it up like that.
I heard that they were saying that's why all the prayers or what should be in Arabic. So if someone does make a mistake, everybody knows it.
Yeah, that is going to the realm of fiqh. We are going to, my intention, inshallah, is to get to the realm of fiqh. But yes, there is there's part of the basis of, the Quran, the prayer being Arabic, is, the universality of it. It's that no matter where you go, whether you go to China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Arabia, America, Singapore, wherever, if you go for the salat, everyone is praying the salat in the general same way. Like you may see some, minor differences here and there, but generally speaking, everyone is praying the salat in the general same way. And so this is the basis that we have. So the thing is that the Quran becomes our major criterion. This becomes the criterion that which we judge things. Why? Because this is the basis of what we believe. And so when it comes to the aspect of the Quran, it's related to Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala. He used to say about the aspect of the Quran, he said that I believe in the book of Allah and what's revealed in it and what's meant by it. And I believe in the Messenger of Allah, what he was sent with and what he meant by it. And if you want to ask, me, my personal position, that's my personal position. The reason why I say that is because if you remember, about 2 classes or so back, we talked about this aspect of, trying to get to a level of ihsan, trying to get to a level of, spiritual excellence in terms of our certainty in Allah. Because the aspect of, rational proofs and debates and stuff like that is that for every argument, there's always a counter argument. Is that, I give you this rational proof about this or this empirical proof about this, whatever the case may be, and you come back and you give me another counter argument and so on and so forth. So when it comes to the Quran, we say that absolute certainly the Quran is the book of Allah, it's the book of truth. So that means what? It means that whether I understand something or not, whether I agree with something or not, my submission comes to the aspect of submitna wa ta'na. However, the reason why we went through that process before of looking at it from a rational perspective and so on and so forth is because if I can't come to a point where I firmly believe that God exists, and then I firmly can believe that the prophets are true, and then I can firmly believe that, the message that they've been sent with, is a true message, then I can't come to the point of just saying the Quran says this. Because if I'm questioning the one who even sent the Quran, or the one who was sent with the Quran, meaning that I'm questioning either Allah or I'm questioning His Messenger, then I can't come to any certainty in this. Because the aspect of the Quran, there's going to be aspects that we don't know. It's just like, for example, some of the one of the things that everyone agrees about is the aspect of certain letters in the Quran, like Alif Lam Mim. You look in just about any translation of the Quran, they'll always say what? Allah knows best the meanings of these verses, or God knows best the meaning of these letters and so on and so forth. There are things that we just cannot understand. However, this is the nature of our belief in the truthfulness of the Quran, is that the aspect of the Quran is, for one, we maintain it in its original language. That's what we said before. No other language is considered to be the Quran. The way that one of my teachers in Atlanta put it to me, he said that reading a translation of the Quran is similar to having never tasted an orange and having someone describe what an orange tastes like to you. Whereas that, depending on how descriptive that person is, everyone's, description, capabilities are varied, is that I may come to a pretty good understanding of what an orange tastes like, but I'll never truly know what an orange tastes like until I go and bite into one myself. And that's the whole aspect of the Quran. Is that, there's one thing for, me to kind of know from a translation standpoint that, ذَلِكَ كِتَابَ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ هُدًى لِلْمُتَّقِينَ. Is that, that, technically speaking, translate to more or less, this is the book in which there is no lie, a guidance for those people of taqwa. And you see, I didn't even translate the word taqwa. I just, kept it more or less what the implication is. But it's a whole other thing if I can just hear it and understand what's being said. Dhalika kitab, because there's different intricacies in that, even that one verse in Surah Al-Baqarah. Because technically speaking, if you were to understand dhalika, anyone have a translation of the Quran with them? No? Okay. But in most books, when they translate that verse, it says dhalika kitab la rayba fi. Most books, and correct me if I'm wrong, it says this is the book. Correct? I'm just going to stop there. Dhalika kitab. This is the book. Anyone that goes into understanding this aspect of Arabic, they'll understand that dhalika does not indicate this. Dhalika is a ism ishara li shay'in ba'id. What do I mean by that? Dhalika is a pointing noun for something that is far away. Whereas if I'm going to say if I'm going to say this, meaning this in English, our concept is that this means that it's something that's close. In Arabic, you also have another word for that. You have hadha. Hadha indicates something that is close. So for example, I wouldn't say dhalika kalam, that pen. Why? Because it's right here. I would say hadha kalam, this pen. But I would possibly say, for example, dhalika bayt, that house. Why? Because it's far away from me. So the question becomes is that why is the translation say this when the actual Arabic word is that. And that goes into all aspects of tafsir and so on and so forth. Now, we don't have time to get into that, but I'm just giving you an example of how, like, you know, even though the translation is giving you, you know, something, you still can't get to, like, you know, the full understanding without, you know, the Arabic. And this is the one thing that the Muslims have over other of the Abrahamic traditions, is that the aspect of it is that our book is still in its original form, the exact way that it's revealed, and we have multiple ways of cross-referencing it. Like, for example, as one of my teachers had pointed out, is that even if every Quran on the face of the earth, you know, may Allah prevent it from ever happening, but even if every Quran on the face of the earth was, you know, wiped out, you know, ceased to exist or whatever the case may be, it would probably only be about, you know, less than a week before we can, you know, have it, you know, another Quran reproduced in its exact form. Because there are different levels of even the understanding of Quran. Some people, they just master it from the standpoint of, you know, memorization. So they just can memorize, like, you know, from Surah Al-Fatiha to Surah Al-Nas. Other people, they also master the aspect of the writing, like exactly how to write the Quran, and in terms of all the different, you know, what they call Arabic tashkils and so on and so forth. You know, other people, they have even, you know, a greater mastery of that concept. And so with all those different people, and there are multiple people, you know, within these different fields. So with all those different people, we will be able to reproduce the Quran, have multiple people cross-reference and double-check it to make sure that it was 100% accurate, and then produce the Quran once again. However, for example, how many different versions of the Bible are there?
King James, this one, that one, this book, that book.
Yeah. And so on and so forth. You know, for example, you have the Catholic Bible, you have the Protestant, you know, our oriented Bible, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, Jehovah got a book. Yeah.
Yep. But how many versions of the Quran are there? One. Now the thing is that, you know, you have different interpretations of them and so on and so forth. And unfortunately in modern times you have, you know, different groups who are trying to kind of manipulate the Quran. But the thing is that, you know, all of them have been, you know, very heavily documented, because again, we have this concept of the isnad, of the chain of transmission, so that we can verify going all the way back to the time of Uthman bin Affan, you know, that this is the Quran that was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so this is the aspect that, again, these that we know, the Zabur, the Torah, the Injil, the Suhuf, in the original form, they were true. However, anything that we have of them now, we have to question it against the Quran itself. And so I'm not going to try to, you know, spend the next 5 minutes talking about the angels, because that just would not be anywhere near sufficient. But I guess before we close out, if there are any, you know, questions or any clarifications needed, we can do that. And if not, then may Allah give you a blessed week.
I want to, can you give me the name of where you said we have to, when we look in the Quran, if his name is not there, you know, every Quran, his...
Uthman ibn Affan.
Okay.
Uthman ibn Affan. It's not going to be in the Quran, it's going to be in the, you know, the... It'll be in the, like, you know, the publishing notes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But Uthman ibn Affan,
I just want to have it.
every Quran goes back to him. Every Quran that we have today goes back to him. Alright, so inshallah we'll stop here. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alam husbana net wakil. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.